We're talking rookie rankings. We're talking fantasy. Specifically, we are talking 2023 Dynasty football rankings at wide receiver and tight end for your 2023 drafts. Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson, as always, at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Shout out to the everydayers. Yesterday, we talked quarterback and running back dynasty rankings for 2023, Matt. Now you're up with wide receivers and tight ends. For those of you who don't know, Matt Williamson also hosts the Locked On Dynasty podcast. You can get even more in-depth analysis of all of these rookies and all of your dynasty leagues going forward. Matt, you've been doing the fantasy thing for a long time, so I always love hearing your rankings. So let's get into wide receivers and tight ends on today's pod.
Yeah, and just to throw it out there, as good of a tight end class as I can remember for Dynasty, maybe number one, and about as bad as a receiver class. I mean, receivers have been awesome. You could get great value at receiver the last 4 or 5 years, even going back the last 10. This year, I don't love it. And a lot of little guys, as we've talked about before, too.
Yeah, a lot of little guys. So it's outliers that you're betting on here with the wide receivers. And, it's interesting. Even the number one wide receiver, who's number one wide receiver everywhere, I want to ask you kind of how you stack in Jaxon, Smith-Njigba as, he was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks, number 20 overall. But even you're still projecting to be the third receiver in that Seattle Seahawks offense. And it's not exactly a super high volume passing game there in Seattle. They do like to run the ball. They drafted another running back in the second round. So Jaxon Smith-Njigba is wide receiver one, and he should be for most people. He's the best wide receiver in this class. But who are you drafting ahead of him in your dynasty leagues at other positions? Is there a quarterback and a running back and a tight end all off the board before you're drafting Jaxon Smith-Njigba?
No, but his stock took a hit. Frankly, going into the NFL draft, Superflex aside, everyone thought Bijan was going to be one. He's one. I was torn between Smith-Njigba and Jahmyr Gibbs for my second overall pick. And I thought Smith-Njigba was clearly, and he still is, the number one receiver, but he doesn't rival Jamar Chase coming out or, any of those type of guys. And you mentioned the landing spot to no fault of his own. It's great for Seattle. I like the pick from Seahawk World. And we talked about that, just a couple days ago when we talked about the West. They stagger that room nicely. But not only they don't throw a ton, I think they were dead last in 11 personnel with 3 receivers on the field. Now, that might go up with a first-round, player at that position, but it's not going to be in the top half of the league. So he's the third receiver on a team that doesn't use a third receiver that much.
Yeah, so much like a running back that doesn't quite have the job yet, you almost need an injury in front of him to get that full complement of snaps. And he's a really good player. But I compared him to Cooper Kupp before the draft, and I think he could be a target hog on the slot in the NFL, but maybe one of the worst landing spots again for him to be that, because the way Sean McVay runs an offense is much different than what we've seen from even when they have similar offensive coordinators and quote unquote systems in place. It still is a lot different, and so he's not going to get that target share, at least to start his NFL career.
Yeah, and we can jump ahead to number 2, which is Quentin Johnston. And I hadn't really thought of this angle, but both those players go to a team that has 2 really good receivers, the Chargers and Seahawks. But I don't know that Allen's there for the long term. Mike Williams is a huge cap hit. Smith-Njigba is going to fight with Metcalf probably almost his entire career. And frankly, I'd much rather have Herbert throwing to me than the Seattle situation.
That's a good point. And I think there's even more opportunity for snaps early for Quentin Johnston fitting in with that group than for Jaxon Smith-Njigba in Seattle.
Yep. And I thought JSN was and I still do think is a much better prospect football player, but one of them got a little bump. One of them got a little knocked down in terms of fantasy production.
Right. And this is Dynasty, so you're still playing the long game. So I still like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And even when it is Jaxon Smith-Njigba and DK Metcalf, it's pretty easy to see, okay, more targets to Smith-Njigba, deep balls to DK Metcalf, right? You got to see how those would meet up. So you're fine with that, but you might have to wait a little while. But clearly, to me, it's Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston 1 and 2. That's how you have them ranked, Matt. How did you figure out the rest of them?
Yeah. So one note that you said yesterday is like, if I use the 3rd overall pick in my rookie draft on any player, I'd sure like to start him in week 1. And I don't think you can with Smith-Njigba.
Yeah, it's definitely a wait and see. I think for all of these,
right? Yeah, all these guys.
Yeah, yeah. Like actually, I think the one that you can feel best about starting early is probably Jordan Addison at 4, and then Jonathan Mingo, who you have ranked at wide receiver 5, who was a second-round pick to a team that just doesn't have a lot of wide receivers, and you could see where the Panthers would. Scheme up some touches for Jonathan Mingo, whereas some of these other players, they just have to, get the ball through the natural progression of their offense, and they won't be on the field unless it's 3 wide.
So Zay Flowers is in there 3, Addison is 4. I think 90% of the draft people out there have Addison 3, Flowers 4, for all the reasons you mentioned. And to be honest with you, if I was going to vote for who's going to be the most productive rookie wide receiver this year, I might pick Addison. Tons of single coverage, playing in a dome, established quarterback. I just thought Zay Flowers was a much better prospect and football player than Addison. So I'm having a hard time releasing that. But he's fighting with Odell and Bateman on a team that doesn't throw the ball or hasn't thrown the ball.
And I think it's a good conversation to have about this wide receiver class. And you mentioned how it's not the greatest wide receiver class in the world. And I think in most years, Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison are second-round picks in the NFL draft. And Jonathan Mingo is probably a third-round pick in the NFL draft. And they all went around higher than that. And they might go higher in your fantasy leagues. But I think it's less likely that these guys break out, which means I think you're going to have to put your sleeper hat on to find that gem of a player in this year's wide receiver class. And there's going to be one. It's just going to be a little bit harder to figure out than I think most years.
Right. And again, I'm not killing Addison, but if you want Jordan Addison in your rookie draft, you probably have to take him with like the 6th pick in your draft overall. And frankly, if he would have come out last year with the exact same profile, he's not going ahead of Burks, Wilson, Olave, London, maybe not even Pickens or Dotson. I mean, you usually get a Jordan Addison prospect in Dynasty at like the 1-2 turn or 15th overall. And this year you got to take him at 6. And it's like,
he'd been more like in the sort of the Sky Moore territory.
Yeah, good call. Right.
Speaking of Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers, Matt, I think that's a big conversation that we're going to get to next. But just to go over this again, and I trust your evaluations, Matt, and I trust your fantasy knowledge and your dynasty knowledge. And you've seen a lot of Jordan Addison too when he was at Pitt before USC. So I trust your judgment on Addison there as well. So you've got him as wide receiver 4. So it goes JSN 1, Quentin Johnston 2, Zay Flowers 3, Jordan Addison 4, Jonathan Mingo 5. That is your top 5 wide receivers for Dynasty here going into the 2023 Dynasty draft season. Real quick, before we get to the Kansas City Chief that I was teasing there for a second, you got Josh Downs 6 and Jaden Reed 7 in your Dynasty wide receiver rankings. Where's your tier here? Is it after Addison at 4? Is it after Downs at 6? How do you tier these guys out through the rest of your top 10?
Yeah, I think I draw a line after Addison. I think Mingo, Downs, Reed are probably their own tier as well. I don't know how much Indy's going to throw the ball, but he sure has Welker-like PPR vibes to me. And Reed, to me, was drafted very high by the Packers. Very different than Christian Watson. So I think he gets a lot of early playing time, slot and out wide. More of a consistent player in time than Watson, perhaps.
I kind of really like Downs, Matt.
I do too.
I like the situation. I think he could be targeted a lot. I think he gets some easy targets from a young quarterback. I don't know how much they're going to throw the ball right now, but and I'm not going to be shocked at all if he's out producing last year's second round or was it third round pick? Where was Pierce drafted last year?
Pierce was a late 2. But I bet Downs catches more balls
as a rookie, and especially projecting it long term. Like if I'm drafting Dynasty assets at wide receiver from the Colts offense, I'd probably take Downs over Pierce.
I think I've ended up with Downs in every one of my rookie drafts so far, which is 4 for 4, because there's some names we're going to talk about that everyone is taking ahead of him, which I don't quite understand.
But again, it might not be this year. They might go big personnel.
Yeah,
you want your big wide receivers blocking for your running game and your quarterback who's going to be scrambling a little bit. But Josh Downs is a sneaky one. I do like him in dynasty leagues this year. He's your wide receiver 6 after Jonathan Mingo. And as we said, Jaden Reed, wide receiver 7. Okay, next we'll go 8 through a lot of sleepers in this class. And the one guy that I think is the most interesting in another Kansas City Chiefs day 2 rookie wide receiver in Rashee Rice next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Make a break right now to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I love the website. It is so easy to use. The app is easy to use at FanDuel. I'm on it right now. You can go check out the Lakers Nuggets game, which was not happened yet. The Lakers looking like they might get swept out of the playoffs here in the Western Conference Finals. And they are favored, though, at home by 3 over the Nuggets. You can get in on that action. You can get in on so many different parlays. Build your own parlays. That game will have already happened by the time you listen to this podcast. You can, how many points will Jokic score? Rebounds. 3 points, 3-pointers made. You can go as deep as you want into individual games, as deep as you want into any sport. Major League Baseball. There is hockey playoffs as well. And of course, tons of NFL futures, tennis, WNBA, which has gotten going now as well. So no end. Soccer, snooker, even if you're into that sort of thing. Find it all. Table tennis. How about that? At FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we are on wide receiver 8 here in Matt Williamson's 2023 Dynasty rankings. After Jaden Reed, we've got Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns at 8, Marvin Mims at 9, and Jalen Hyatt at 10 with Rashee Rice at 11. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Rashee Rice because it sounds like you differ from the rest of the fantasy community about where to rank Kansas City Chiefs rookie Rashee Rice.
I do. He's going ahead of Mingo, always going ahead of Downs, ahead of Reed. He's often wide receiver 5. And granted, it's a bad class. So what he has going for him in a very Clyde Edwards-Helaire manner, he was drafted by the Chiefs and he was drafted high. But I was not fond of him as a player going into the draft, and I'm not going to change my tune just because the Chiefs drafted him. I don't think he's much of a separator. And you mentioned Sky Moore before. Perfect example, but the Chiefs are one of the most complex offenses in the league. Now, I know their receiver room is kind of ugly right now, but nobody as a rookie comes in there and does well. I mean, Sky Moore really struggled. I kind of used that driving on the wrong side of the road in Turks and Caicos conversation with him. Yeah. Mecole Hardman didn't do much as a rookie. I mean, Tony getting thrown into the mix. I don't know why this guy's any different, and I don't think he's as good a prospect as most of those dudes.
It's hard because did they draft Rashee Rice because they didn't like what they saw from Sky Moore? Or did they just need wide receivers and he was their guy and they drafted him? Because to me, the guy to target in that offense is Sky Moore. The year 2
buying him everywhere,
right? The year 2 jump that you see from wide receivers around the NFL, because many times wide receivers' heads are spinning as rookies. So I'm all about Sky Moore this year. It sounds like people are way in on Rashee Rice. Yeah, and so I think that's just like the rookie bump that you get and the excitement around it, and people forget about the year 2 guys sometimes. I like Sky Moore if I'm drafting a Chiefs player, and I'm kind of with you. I'm not necessarily down on Rice, but I'm not going to pay the price of wide receiver 5 amongst rookies. And really, I like a lot of these guys just as much in this tier. Like I'm just, Marvin Mims. I like the tape from Marvin Mims. I'll take a shot at Mims. Cedric Tillman. I mean, he was the first pick of the Browns draft. I know they didn't pick until round 3, but he could carve out a role there. Jalen Hyatt, he's a little bit tough for fantasy, but you can see what a role would look like for Hyatt. So an interesting class right here. And I feel like there's an area where someone's going to break out and you just hope you hit on that guy. And it could be Rashee Rice.
It could be. I mean, of course it could be. I mean, Hyatt to me is too one-dimensional and a very crowded Giants room. I'm worried I'm too low on Mims because he's going before I'm even considering him. He's going 6, 7 overall in terms of receivers. And I really liked him coming out of school. I just have him a little lower. I'm not real comfortable with my Mims ranking right now because, Sutton, Judy, all those guys could be gone a year from now. And much like Tillman, Sean Payton's first draft pick for the Broncos was Marvin Mims, which he probably knows more than I do, So,
and it's like, okay,
yeah.
the wide receiver room almost has been somewhat overrated over the last couple of years in Denver, and there's been injuries, and they've been listening to offers for guys, and so you kind of see where, okay, Peyton's
we're frustrated
the
with
guy
this
there,
and
and
go get our own dudes.
he just chose his own dude, right? So
Yeah.
Marvin Mims is a very interesting one for me in this range of dynasty drafts for sure.
My last nugget in that range is I do have Tillman one spot above Mims, and I could be convinced to flop those. I'm getting Mims nowhere. I'm getting Tillman everywhere. And people look at Tillman like he's blocked right now, and he sort of is, but he was their first pick, and they had a lot of other needs. And we talked about this like a week or so ago. Awful cap situation for the Browns next year. Like, I don't know if Cooper will be there next year.
I think it's probably a big reason why they drafted Tillman.
Right. I mean, he has some similarities to Cooper. Big physical guy, but cheaper.
All right. So that means let's go through this again. JSN 1, Quentin Johnston 2, Zay Flowers 3, Jordan Addison 4, Jonathan Mingo 5, Josh Downs 6, Jaden Reed 7, Cedric Tillman 8, Marvin Mims 9, Jalen Hyatt 10, Rashee Rice 11. Then it is Michael Wilson, wide receiver 12, and Nathaniel Tank Dell of the Houston Texans at wide receiver 13. And then there is a tier break for you, Matt. And then I think 14 through whatever 25 is just throwing darts.
Late picks. Hope they get in a good situation or an injury, or maybe get some good camp buzz. Maybe get some good OTA buzz the next couple days. But that again, not a deep class compared to usual. And usually, if you're getting the 14th rookie receiver off the board, you're pretty happy about it. I'm not this year.
Right. I do think Dell is worth a dart throw because he was hand chosen by the young quarterback that they just drafted number 2 overall in CJ Stroud. But again, I don't know if there's a great path to playing time. And if I'm looking for a receiver there in Houston, I'd probably do the year 2 thing, right? Even though Mechie didn't get a rookie season like Sky Moore did, I would still go there first. And I would expect more targets for Mechie than a rookie in Dell, who's an outlier already because of size.
It's funny you brought this up because 2 of my real targets are Sky Moore, who you mentioned, and people don't like him now because he had a bad rookie year, and Rice's year. And I like Nico Collins a lot. I think he's the bigger prototypical. He may lead that team in receiving this year, and he's still really young.
I'm going to go all the way down to your wide receiver 23, the last one you have ranked here, in Dontavian Wicks. And I'm so frustrated that he went to the Packers because he was my sleeper guy on day 3 in this class. And he's just got too many guys to kind of wade through. But I really think he's got starting ability in the NFL, and the Packers have had a pretty good eye for wide receivers here recently.
Yeah.
And but the landing spot's tough for him to carve out a role early in a career. So he's someone I'm going to kind of keep an eye on the watch list, I think, in most leagues. But hard for him with the path. I like A.T. Perry as well as a 6'3" downfield wide receiver with the New Orleans Saints. I think he's got a much better path to play potentially there. So if I'm throwing darts here, I'm gonna go A.T. Perry, who was your wide receiver 20.
Okay. My guy there is Puka Nacua, who I compared to Golden Tate when we did the West, just because they're going to play young guys. Maybe Cooper Kupp gets traded. McVay schemes things up, take a shot.
All right, tight ends, dynasty tight end rankings for 2023. I mean, it's got to be Dalton Kincaid, right? He's got a superstar quarterback. He's the best receiving tight end of this class, and he was the only first-round pick. So Dalton Kincaid, tight end 1. I think that's pretty easy on everyone's list. It's easy on your list here, Matt. My question first here is like the Smith-Njigba question. How does he sort of fold in with the other positions? Are you drafting him over Njigba in drafts? Are you drafting him over like running back 3 in your dynasty leagues?
So, big picture, and trust me, folks on Twitter have told me, boy, Williamson just keeps raving about all these tight ends. He wants the Steelers to get a tight end. All he talks about is these tight ends. Got to get one of these tight ends. And Ryan and I have a little running joke, too, that I have an affinity for the hot young tight end. I always have 2 or 3 hot young tight ends on my roster than I should that just clog it up, hoping they're going to turn into Kelsey or Kittle, who, as rookies, nobody wanted. You know what I mean? So I worry that all these tight ends are getting drafted too high, including Kincaid, because anyone that's ever played fantasy knows rookie tight ends basically do nothing. I mean, history is so strong in that way. but I'm still taking him in the Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Zach Charbonnet neighborhood because I don't like this rookie class.
Right. And you're swinging for upside. And even
Yeah.
with tight ends taking a little bit of time, some of these have just such a clear path to playing time. And to be honest with you, Kincaid has a less clear path to me for just total number of snaps than the next two guys on the list. And
yes,
so,
but I look at Kincaid as if he's Cole Beasley, not Dawson Knox.
right. But you still have to go three
But he
wide.
still has to play, right.
Yeah. And then you have to still get targeted over Knox, who's also going to be on the field, and over veteran wide receivers. Of course, they're wide receiver one, and Stephon Diggs. So that's where it's a little bit more difficult for me. Even though Kincaid's clearly tight end one, the question is, like you said, then maybe they're going a little bit too high, so you can't get value in who your tight end two is. Rough. Sam Laporta to the Detroit Lions and Dallas Cowboys tight end Michael Mayer.
Mayer's a Raider. So we'll get the Cowboys.
Oakland Raider. They traded up for him. In my mind, it's like mock draft.
He should be a Raider.
I put Michael Mayer and the Cowboys in mock drafts in my head. So it takes me a full season sometimes to get my mocks out of my head and actually they're real landing spots in my head.
Absolutely. And they're both really good landing spots to me. I mean, I think Laporta, again, rookie tight end struggle. I understand that, but very clear path to playing time for Laporta and Mayer. A lot of people have Mayer over Laporta. I just thought Laporta was a better pass catcher athlete than Mayer was coming into the draft. I still believe it. Run after the catch, and the Lions tight ends are bad.
More on that next and how we break up some of the other clusters of this tight end class in Matt Williamson's 2023 Dynasty tight end rankings next. Thanks, everybody, once again for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Shout out to the everydayers. We got OTAs coming up. We've got camp storylines, and there is so much more to get ready for the 2023 NFL season. And we've got it all covered for you every day right here on Peacock and Williamson, available on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you're subscribed up to that new Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel, by the way, and get those questions in for us at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL for this week's Twitter Thursday episode. Okay, Matt. So we've got Kincaid 1, Sam Laporta tight end 2, Michael Mayer tight end 3. And I agree with your analysis. Like Michael Mayer, I think was I had him ranked higher as a football player, as a draft prospect, but seeing Laporta go as high as he did to the Detroit Lions that have a tight end need, and he's a better pass catcher. And I like the athleticism. I like the effort he gives. He's a player I was like, oh man, someone's going to steal Laporta in the third round. And the Lions are like, nope, we're actually taking him really high in round 2. So they clearly like him. I think Laporta is tight end 2 for fantasy, pretty easy for me. And I think he could out snap Kincaid actually as a rookie.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all that. I just think Kincaid's a special receiver. But no, I like Laporta quite a bit.
So tight end 4 for you is Luke Musgrave. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you liked him a lot pre-draft as well. Is there a big tier break for you somewhere over here?
He was my 2 coming into the draft. I think he really runs well. I think there's a lot of receiving upside there. And Green Bay drafted 2 tight ends. And I think it really hurts Tucker Kraft, who I liked a lot. And I think it hurts Musgrave a lot. And they drafted Jalen Reed. Their 3 pass catchers are going to be really young, and Christian Watson's super young, and quarterbacks are not a little bit up in the air. And we have seen some history, namely the Ravens, where they draft 2 tight ends, and one of them does really well, Mark Andrews, and the other one doesn't, but I don't think the landing spot and situation for Musgrave did him any favors at all.
It's really hard. And all it does is make all the rest of the players less valuable. So it's like, I don't know to put money on Musgrave. I talked about Dontavian Wicks. I loved him in the draft as a 5th round player. And there's, multiple rookies from last year as pass catchers with an unknown at quarterback. So this is almost like Lord of the Flies. Let's see who is still alive after this season on that depth chart for the Green Bay Packers. And we'll have a lot better idea of things. And for me, it's just like, can you get a guy late enough where if he doesn't play at all this year, you're okay with stashing him?
Kill the pig, drink his blood. Kill the pig, drink his blood. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of competition, which is exactly what the Packers want. And tight ends usually take a while. And like Musgrave's a perfect example, and this always happens with tight ends. And Darnell Washington's a great example. Like, you kind of have to spend a fair amount to get them now. But if they have a rookie year where they catch 15 passes and, are rotated in, you can get that guy for nothing in week 10. or a year from now.
That's why, to me, the tier break is clearly after the top three, because
Yes.
playing time is going to be there for Michael Mayer. And, Jimmy G loves throwing to tight ends, and Josh McDaniels loves scheming things for his tight ends. And that's going to be part of the progression, right, for your quarterback and your passing game in Las Vegas. Sam Laporta, we talked about. Kincaid, we talked about. Then it gets really dicey. And it's almost like, okay, if you love Luke Musgrave, let someone else draft him and then trade for him next offseason.
Absolutely. It's a great tight end trick. Everybody loves the rookies right now. He's going to break the mold. He's going to have a big rookie year. Probably not. You can get second-year tight ends cheap or during the year, and it's great business.
So tight end 5, Luke Schoonmaker. Tight end 6, Darnell Washington. And tight end 7, Tucker Kraft.
3 guys I really like. I think Schoonmaker's situation is clearly the best. Like, he might be the Cowboys' starting tight end.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. I mean, it's not as slam dunkish as Laporta or Mayer, but I bet it's not too long at least. I think he's a better athlete than people realize. I did cartwheels when my Steelers took Darnell Washington, but the way I look at it now, I think he plays 20 snaps a game as a rookie. You know what I mean? How much double tight end sets are they going to play? And Gentry kind of has the blocker role locked down as that number 2. Freiermuth's good. Washington has a knee thing out there, but you might get him really cheap a year from now.
Yeah, that one's tough because it was such a good really tight end class. And then you start looking at it from a fantasy perspective, and it's like, okay, well, Schoonmaker's got a path to play. The top 3 guys do, and everybody else is like, well, I have no idea. Like, these guys might not actually be as impactful as everyone expects. And then you mentioned what's really important to remember. And, highly drafted tight ends haven't been great in the NFL historically. No. And it takes some time. So, yeah, from a fantasy perspective, the rookie tight ends might go way overdrafted.
Like, would you rather draft one of those guys or Roschon Johnson, who one running back injury, all of a sudden you're starting him, and running backs get injured all the time,
Yeah. When it comes to Darnell Washington, I would take Tank Dell. I would take, I don't know. I would take so many guys over Darnell Washington.
Eric Gray for the Giants is maybe a Barkley injury, which is not a crazy thing, from being the Giants starting running back,
right. Yeah.
And he could be Pacheco this year, it's crazy.
In a dynasty league, I might take Will Levis over Darnell Washington.
Right. Yeah. Again, it's rough. I mean, I love that the Steelers got him. I can't wait to watch him this week, but I just don't see a lot of fantasy points.
Tucker Kraft is wide receiver 7 for you. Wide receiver 8, Brenton Strange. 9, Elijah Higgins, sort of a wide receiver tight end hybrid. We'll see what that ends up looking like. Yeah, and if he has tight end eligibility for your league is another question. I haven't really seen. Is he tight end eligible in most leagues?
I think so, yeah. I think I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I think when the Dolphins went to the podium, they called him a tight end. So now leagues are calling him a tight end until further notice. So that's the beauty of him, is he's a wide receiver playing tight end, but he's a 7th round pick. I mean, but he's a dart throw in dynasty leagues.
Right. Yes. But you would think that receiving value could be there potentially if he can find a role in that offense specifically. So yeah, sleeper there in Elijah Higgins. Tight end 9, tight end 10, Zach Kuntz, who had an amazing combine and horrible tape at Old Dominion. That's definitely not something that's going to help you out now. Will Mallory, good receiver, athletic, is tight end 11. And then George Kittle's back up in San Francisco, Cameron Latu at tight end 12, the 3rd round pick.
And all those guys are pretty close to undraftable, unless you're in super deep leagues. And, they are hot young tight ends that just clog up your roster. The one that I'm worried about that goes earlier than I have him ranked is Brenton Strange. And I thought the Texans overdrafted him, but they drafted him ahead of Washington and Kraft and some of these guys I thought were better players, and his path isn't too bad.
I think they really, and they're bringing over that 49ers offense. So I kind of thought, interesting. Why did they like Brenton Strange so much there? And it has to be because of the positional flexibility, move him around, H-back stuff in the slot. So they must have a plan there. I mean, I don't see how they could say, oh, this is going to be George Kittle, right? But I think it's just positional flexibility. Could play a little fullback, and that way you don't have to have a full-time fullback position, H-back type stuff. I think that's what they like from Brenton Strange. Obviously, the way he plays, it's easy to like him when you watch him. I just don't know if the athletic and pass-catching upside is there.
So this is kind of interesting because this just happened 30 seconds ago. I got a notification while we were chatting about these tight ends. Is in a rookie draft I have going on that team, the only quarterback I have rostered right this minute is Dak Prescott, which is a little scary, but you can always get quarterbacks. We talked about that on Monday. I can trade something for Kirk Cousins, yada, yada, somebody I can live with. So I'm up at 3.04, and the best guys on the clock right now are like Schoonmaker, Washington, Kraft, Eric Gray, Tank Dell, So I just threw one out there. I'm trading 3.04 for the best quarterback I can get. And I get a response back, Derek Carr for 3.04. And I'm like, I'll take that, but let's milk something else out of him. So I retort with 3.04, my fourth next year for Carr and your third next year. Accepted. Boom. Now I have Derek Carr as a backup as opposed to taking Darnell Washington and hoping 2 years from now he plays,
And then you can trade for Darnell Washington this offseason
next year.
And then you got a third round pick, an extra third to draft probably a better player you can get in the third in this year's spot.
Exactly. That's the whole plan. Like I told you guys Monday about the value of a Carr or a Cousins or a Stafford or a Rodgers. Like you can always get those dudes. So swing for the fence on Anthony Richardson was the moral of the story yesterday.
There you go. That's why you listen to Peacock and Williamson. That's why you should also tune into Locked On Dynasty featuring one Matt Williamson daily right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Those are Matt Williamson's Dynasty rankings. The last couple of days, we did quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. Let us know what you think at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Get your questions in for our Twitter Thursday episode. You can also drop a comment on the new Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel as well. Make sure you're subscribed up, hit the notification, tell a friend about Peacock and Williamson. Back next time right here on the next PMW.